Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be hunting down the most dangerous prey again in Predator Badlands, then diving into the dark underbelly of the internet again in the third volume of World Tree. But before all of that, Nick, do you have something else to recommend to our listeners?
Speaking of World Tree, I have also read another recent-ish, it's 2 or 3 years old now, but I've finally got around to reading the Image Comics miniseries 8 Billion Genies by Soule and Browne. This is the same creative team behind Curse Words, which I now remember we covered a while ago. And this is a standalone story, the premise of which is basically that one day everyone on the planet, all 8 billion of us, suddenly get access to a genie who will grant us one wish. Those wishes are then inflicted on the world all at the same time, and it's just utter chaos, basically. I mean, if you remember Curse Words, Browne was quite good at having this sort of basic realistic style, but lots of really stupid cartoony shit happening around it. So there's lots of like buildings coming to life, dinosaurs suddenly appearing, and the world just generally going to hell. And the thing that's gluing all this together is this bar setting, which is established at the beginning. And basically, as soon as this thing happens, the owner of the bar, who it turns out might have existing knowledge of this whole genie thing. But anyway, basically he takes his wish, which is that nothing that happens outside, none of the wishes that are granted in the world will affect this bar or the interior of the bar. So the bar just remains this like constant, even as the world goes increasingly to shit, and we just sort of see everything changing around it. And that's basically the premise, yes. It becomes a lot of questions of, shall we leave the bar? Shall we stay in the bar forever? What do the people in the bar think of the latest stupid thing that's happened? And things just get increasingly elaborately ridiculous. Basically, the world just absolutely descends into incomprehensible states.
It sounds very interesting and quite bizarre. I assume tonally this is comedy, sort of comedy drama. Is it? Yes, it's sort of played for ridiculous laughs, I guess.
Honestly, one of the interesting things about it is that although Browne is very much seizing on the chance to draw some big cartoony shit, it's being taken somewhat seriously. It's very much like high concepts. Like the writing style here is very much, okay, let's really take this to the absolute logical extent. Let's not just use it as a springboard for a few character stories or something. There's not really a protagonist here. There's just this sort of common setting. The real question is, what would the logical conclusion of this be? What would people actually do? What would the result of people's silly wishes be? And you get like scenarios like, people who haven't used their wish yet, because you only get one, being like kidnapped and hoarded as like precious resources because they can then be made to do things by people at gunpoint. Or this idea that there's a point where children are allowed to use their wish. I can't remember what age it is now. It's like 12 or something. And it becomes this point that all parents and everyone in the world is terrified of, because there's every chance they're just going to come of age and immediately wish that everyone in the room has made of ice cream or something. And it's... Charles Soule, famously, the big bit of Charles Soule trivia everyone knows is that he was a lawyer before he became a comics writer. And he is very much going through the fine print of this ridiculous setup.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. I mean, it's a very creative idea and obviously one that's like ripe for interesting and unusual stories. So I can see how it works. Interesting that you say there's not really like a protagonist. It's more about the minutiae of the story and how it plays out. So I guess it's kind of very focused on the plot and the events that are generated by this sort of bizarre circumstance.
Well, but as I say, there's the sort of setting of the bar, and the bar owner, he's turns out to have, a bit more connection to the whole genie thing that he first lets on. So he's probably the most major character, but he's not the protagonist of the whole thing. It sort of flips between the various people who start off in the bar or who arrive in the bar and then leave. And there's also this sort of structure of, I think the first issue is the first 8 seconds after the genies arrive, and then the next issue is the first 8 minutes, and then the next issue is the first 8 hours. See, it sounds ridiculous, but it's surprisingly vigorous work, 8 billion genies. There's a lot of structure there.
Yeah, the number 8 reappearing again and again. The first 8 seconds is interesting. Assume you just see like the same 8 seconds from a lot of different perspectives.
I think it's actually dramatized slowly as it goes through. It doesn't keep going back to the beginning. It just keeps cutting around. Again, it's quite cleverly done.
Yeah. It does sound like a really interesting, creative, like slightly different story. Yeah, it sounds really good. I do remember us really liking Curse Words. I think that was one of the earlier things we reviewed. Possibly the first comic we discussed. There wasn't a recommendation.
Certainly one of them. Certainly possibly among the first Image comic original concept type things. Yeah,
but I remember it being very good, and also I remember having really distinctive art that was well done and really contributed to the storytelling.
Browne's really good. As I say, he can really pinball between the sort of serious human characterization and the silly stuff and have it all somehow exist in this unified state, and it always looks great. And it's fantastic artwork. I think Curse Words was kind of a bit of a cult hit, and this has been, I think, a bit of a mainstream breakthrough project for them. I think this has done really well. They're now doing a sequel series that I've forgotten the name of. It's about devils, which is sort of thematically similar but not actually connected. And they've also sold the TV rights to this. So yeah, this has done very well for them.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if we will get a TV show.
Maybe. It's interesting because this isn't... There are comics that are very... I don't know.
TV-like or
TV-like
very
or
clearly lend themselves to a TV adaptation.
Very pitch-heavy, very much like they're kind of fishing to sell them rights. And 8 Billion Genies is quite big and quite silly, and as I say, there's a lot of like massive, ridiculous stuff happening. There's really no sign of them thinking, okay, we have to keep this fairly low-key and sensible so that it can be filmed. I will be interested to see... how much of it they actually film, if and when they try.
Yeah, and also there's the whole thing about who will be the main character that you're anchoring from. Because if you're moving around through a lot of perspectives and focusing more on the events than one person's experience of them or a character journey, I mean, obviously that's quite different to the way TV's usually made. I mean, maybe they'll make something really different and unusual. That's a bit more experimental, as it sounds like the story is a bit more experimental, but it's probably easier to take sort of bold narrative decisions with the lower cost medium of comics than a whole TV show.
Yeah, no, I'm interested to see how they'll handle this, whether they'll turn it into a borderline anthology or something with... I mean, I guess it's not a million miles away from some of your bigger cast sprawling shows like Game of Thrones, but whether they can get a Game of Thrones budget for this, I don't know.
It actually sounds interesting, yeah. So how many issues is like the whole thing?
I mean, come on, Alastair, obviously it's 8.
Oh, yeah. Right, well, I can't believe that I didn't put that together, yeah. Yeah, with 8 seconds, 8 minutes, etc., etc.
Yeah, 8 issues. It's been out, as I say, it was a few years ago now. They've now moved on to the sequel. It's available as a collection and stuff. And yeah, for whatever it's worth, it's on the Global Comics app, which is where I read it, if anyone else has that. So yeah, this is a good series, yeah. It wasn't really some sort of cult success that deserves more exposure. It did very well, but yeah, if you haven't read it, yeah, I finally read it, and it's good. Alastair, how about you? What have you consumed?
Well, so in the last episode, we talked about a film from this series of films that Netflix is putting out in the build-up to Christmas, which is, their series of films by visionary directors. In the last episode, we discussed A House of Dynamite. I'm going to continue that theme by discussing the next one chronologically released in the series, which is Ballad of a Small Player. This is also one of the big films Netflix was pushing at the London Film Festival. It's also the new film from director Edward Berger, who did All Quiet on the Western Front and Conclave, that we both really liked last year. I think, made it into our top 5. So yeah, I was keen to see his new film, especially now that it's on Netflix. Yeah, and it's very stylish. It's got a great visual aesthetic to it. It follows Colin Farrell and also stars Fala Chen, Tilda Swinton and Alex Jennings. Colin Farrell is a sort of down on his luck gambler in Macau who has run up huge amounts of debts at various casinos. He's on the run for various dodgy things that he's done, which unfold and you discover as the film goes on. And it's kind of like a redemption story, really. Yeah, it's kind of about how he kind of goes from his like kind of lowest point up to reclaiming his humanity. It's more, abstract or stylized than maybe Conclave. That was more of like a strict thriller, or All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a literary adaptation and a war movie. But there is something like really quite oddly compelling about the sort of style and tone of this film. So I can certainly recommend it.
Okay, no, it sounds fun. I enjoy a good, slightly askew narrative. I didn't realise Netflix were doing a whole series of visionary director films. I'm assuming Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is the next one. Or one of them. Yep.
As of recording, maybe not as of listening, I think Frankenstein is still in the cinema, and it'll be coming to Netflix soon. Then there's, I think, a film with George Clooney in called J. Kelly. So that's the one I know the least about. And then obviously the final one is the new Knives Out movie that drops just before Christmas, which I think is called Wake Me Up Dead Man. And that opened the London Film Festival this year, and that had a lot of buzz around it as well. So yeah, it's part of a big thing, I guess. It makes sense. This is the run up to Christmas when the Oscar films get dropped. It's got cold and dark. Everyone's come inside. Netflix are like, okay, well, every 2 weeks we're going to drop something big for you to watch. And these are certainly big films with like very high profile casts. Colin Farrell's like a solid A-lister, George Clooney, Daniel Craig. The cast across these films are like well-known people. And yeah, Colin Farrell's really, really good in this film, playing an English character in China. He's good at looking kind of like out of his depth. So I think it's a really good film also of capturing the sort of strange feeling of being like abroad and alone, and especially in like a very different culture, kind of catches like, you know, how like different and isolated he is, and how, although in sort of things that look kind of very recognizably Western, like casinos, restaurants, bars, there's this just kind of element of Chinese culture running through the whole thing that makes him look like an outsider, you know, someone who doesn't quite belong. And obviously he's a man putting on a pretense, and there's this sort of interesting whole thing about the construction of identity and being someone else in a different place. That's kind of interesting films that are very much brought out through like the visuals design of the film.
Okay, yeah, no, Colin Farrell, I've not watched a huge amount of his films, but he's always been good in the ones I've seen him in. Obviously, the last one was probably Banshees of Inisherin a few years back, which, to be fair, was absolutely excellent, and he was great in that, so fair enough. I should probably get more excited about Colin Farrell films.
Now, that's a really good film. I know we also really enjoyed After Yang a couple of years ago on this podcast. That was good. Yeah, I mean, you know, he was a bit of, you know, a sort of laddie film star when he first broke onto the scene about sort of 20, 25 years ago. He was sort of a young man, very successful very quickly, but he's had a really interesting, like, portfolio of films, playing, again, a wide range of characters and playing a lot against type. Again, like in After Yang, he's quite understated and sort of introverted character. He's played similar characters in things like The Lobster, as well as playing these kind of bigger, larger-than-life people in films like, you know, Intermission or some of his other, like, well-known roles. So he's one of those people that, like, it's always worth paying attention to when he's in something, because he makes interesting choices. And I guess he's probably at the point now where he can just choose what he wants to do. He doesn't seem to do a lot of like really high profile, I don't know, action blockbusters or things like that. Maybe he feels that stage of his career is behind him and he just wants to choose the projects he likes. But like I say, Banshees of Inisherin, this film, I mean, this is a high profile film with a high profile director. I suppose it's just not a summer blockbuster. And he does a good performance in this, again, playing this man who's a bit out of his depth, you know, has sort of shifting identities, trying to find himself amongst all the lies that he's told. It's one of those films where not like a lot happens, but kind of what does happen is like quite intense, and usually like there's some quite interesting like introspective bits between them, as well as some beautiful cinematography.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super familiar with the director's work. This is, I guess, his follow-up to Conclave, which was that his first big like breakthrough film, or was he a big name before that I'm just not enough of a cinephile to recognise?
Well, I guess his breakthrough film was All Quiet on the Western Front, as that was nominated for like Best Picture and was like, again, a big Netflix hit. But I believe, and I guess listeners, if I'm wrong, write me in, Conclave, though, was his first English language film. He's a German director who I think's had quite a lot of success in Germany, culminating with, All Quiet on the Western Front. It's originally a German novel, and although the British, I think, adaptation from the late 1920s, though it might be early 1930s, probably the most famous version of the film. But this one he made a few years ago was a German language adaptation, and I think stuck closer to the plot of the book than the original film. And then I think Conclave was his first step into English language filmmaking. So he's had a very successful career in a sort of short space of time, and last two films both nominated for Best Picture and received a lot of praise. They both made big waves at London Film Festival and other film festivals. Now he's got this film, again, might end up with a Best Picture nominee. We're not really sure who the runners and riders are at this point. Colin Farrell, again, I could see him getting at least a Best Actor nominee. It's a great film, and it is very much built around his performance. He's the main character who's in basically every scene. Although I must say that certainly Fala Chen as the sort of main Chinese character, she's really, really good. Plays well opposite Colin Farrell, as well as Tilda Swinton doing the sort of slightly strange private investigator, and Alex Jennings also very good as like another of this sort of English gambling con men people in Macau group. So and I think it's a strong cast, but I can really see Colin Farrell getting possibly an Oscar nomination for this, considering the strength of his performance.
Wow, okay. No, it sounds good. It sounds like something I should probably watch one day.
Yeah, I'd recommend this. Like I say, it's not particularly plot heavy and it's quite slow paced, but it's got these like beautiful visuals and some like very intense acting and this real, I think, quite moving redemption story and quite a lot of tension in some moments. So it's good. Again, it's a bit different, I don't know, than maybe, some of the big films of the year. I think it's a bit more stylized. I don't know if it's, again, Netflix are being a bit bolder because they don't have to worry about like big cinema returns, although all these films are getting a short cinema run, I guess, so they're awards eligible, such as Frankenstein and House of Dynamite before that. I guess they're getting a big push to get eyeballs and wallets back now that they've got competition from Disney Plus, Apple TV, Paramount Plus and all the others. So they brought out the big guns, hired some big name directors to drop some big name films in short succession, and it certainly worked. I mean, I'm sort of watching my way through them, and I'm excited for the future stuff, especially Wake Me Up Dead Man.
I mean, it's interesting in some ways because I think a lot of the think pieces I've read about the current state of TV or media or streaming or whatever have been very much that streaming is moving away from plunging huge amounts of money into letting the auteurs make their special precious projects. So I guess it's nice that Netflix are still doing this sort of thing, at least for now.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely aimed at like the Oscar season and this particular time of year. We'll see how it works with them. They've not done anything like this before that I can remember. Have this like whole series of like big high profile films and have it packaged together. I mean, like each one's got a big tube advertising campaign that can't have been cheap, but on each poster, especially the big posters on the tubes, I think they're called like 36 sheets. Anyway, they've got a little banner on the side with the Netflix logo, and it lists all the other films in the series. It says like, a series of films by visionary directors or something like that. It lists all their release dates and all the directors and all their titles. So it kind of is sold as this kind of package thing. And now, I mean, I'm kind of invested in it now. I'm going to just keep watching them. I guess stay tuned to this podcast to find out what I thought of those other films.
Well, I was going to say, these films drop every 2 weeks. This podcast drops every 2 weeks. The content writes itself, lads.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and now it's time to talk about Predator Badlands, the latest film in the Predator franchise, and I guess the third release in this sort of mini-renaissance it seems to have been having over the last few years, spearheaded by writer-director Dan Trachtenberg. First there was Prey on streaming during the pandemic, then there was the animated movie Killer of Killers a few months ago, and now we're here with Badlands, at last an actual live-action cinematic release for the series, and this one, for the first time, has a predator as the protagonist, as a young runty predator who has been threatened with execution by his father for just not being predatorial enough, finds himself on a wilderness planet trying to hunt down that world's apex predator in a bid to show that he himself is the most predatory predator. And then, whilst trying to do this, he encounters a damaged synthetic, played by Elle Fanning, and gets sucked into a corporation's attempt to go after the same target as him for inevitably nefarious money reasons. We have both seen this film. Alastair, what did you think of it?
So I was sceptical of the concept at first, having like a predator as the main character. I kind of feel, and I probably have said in this podcast, that the predators kind of work better when they're villains and you don't learn much about them or their society. They're sort of dangerous and they have this culture of hunting, but we don't really understand where they come from or what they're doing. But obviously the main character has to survive. And this one obviously has the predator as the main character. So I was a little bit skeptical at first, but I do think, this did work as an enjoyable film. It's very much a 12A action movie vibe to it. I mean, I think we're quite a long way from the sort of scarier ones when they're trying to make the predators like genuinely terrifying. And I think that's partly because it's the main character and it's not hiding, stalking things. It's, you're following the predator. But it is a kind of fun, entertaining action movie. Lots of great fight sequences, chases, explosions, all the things that you want. The predator's largely killing synthetics, which I guess is how they get away with a 12A, as no people were hurt in the plot of this film, but it does do its job as an entertaining night at the cinema, and there's certainly a lot worse Predator films that I've sat through. So, overall, pretty good.
Yeah, this is another solid film from the slight Predator renaissance we're having. I enjoyed it. It's a fun action film. It moves along well from beginning to end. I wasn't bored, which seems to be a big thing I care about. We have definitely said before that these creatures, we've said this about Alien as well, the sort of brother franchise to Predator, but, these creatures work better when they're kept a bit off stage and we don't really, get in depth about them. And ultimately they are breaking that rule here, so it's interesting to see them try and do that, and maybe they've partly got away with it by keeping things a little bit cute and light, not having the Predator kill any humans and giving us quite a bit of light banter between the Predator and his AI companion, and he even gets a little cute mascot friend as well. Yeah, it moves along fine, it's fun. It honestly, if anything, the weird thing is that for a film that's about an alien, and which sounds like it's taking quite a big weird jump, as you say, it comes across as quite a straightforward sort of 12A sci-fi action movie in the end. But within that mould, it's pretty entertaining. It's not changing any lives, and I'm pretty sure Prey was better, just because it felt a bit more visceral and dangerous. But this was enjoyable enough.
I felt both Prey and Predator Killer of Killers were more interesting films. I mean, like Prey being a film set in frontier America, mid 18th century, focused on an indigenous American community. It's kind of doing something quite different with, well, not only the Predator franchise, but what you normally get from like an action movie and things like that. You know, usually when I describe that film to people in that way, people go like, oh, that's not what I expected from a Predator film, and it's not. And then Killer of Killers was an animated film, but it's kind of got this anthology structure with these different great warriors from different periods in history facing off against the Predator, each one with a kind of like tight character-based story. Again, you know, it's quite an interesting like narrative structure, whereas this one is very much like this pretty relatable Predator goes on a quest to prove his dad wrong and avenge his brother and all the things like that. And what we learn about the Predator society from seeing it from their perspective is kind of what you do into it anyway, which is that they have a very ritualistic approach to hunting and is sort of focused on being badass and tough and violent, something similar to, I don't know, Viking culture or something like that. I mean, generally what you see of them, it seems pretty similar to humans. Like, they have parents and they have siblings and they live in sort of like clans. And, you know, again, we're not really like coming up with an original creative alien race. I preferred the Predators when I, you know, had this thing like, you know, what kind of society produces a creature that just so mercilessly hunts all the time? And like, you know, what would their society be like? You know, where do they come from and things like that? But actually, you know, once you see it, it turns out, well, it's kind of like us, but like just a bit more focused on hunting and things like that. Again, like probably more like some more militaristic martial cultures that have existed in history. You know, Vikings I've mentioned before. So in that sense, it's a bit like, that's a little bit underwhelming and things like that. It would have been a more interesting film had the Predators had a very strange and very alien society, but it's the protagonist of a blockbuster movie. They weren't going to do that. I'd certainly stand by what I said about Alien Earth, that I prefer the aliens to be off screen more and just kind of nasty things that come after people rather than learning more about their society. But you get invested in this film, and you do get quite invested in this violent alien in his quest to like kill as many things as possible, including this big creature. And it's partly because you just relate to him as a regular human being, because you've seen he's got a dad who's disapproving of him and his brother dies and things like that. You know, it's fairly standard action movie stuff, but you know, it does get you invested in what is ultimately something there that's to thrill you with spectacle, and it doesn't let you down in that department.
Yeah, no, there's some good action. Sometimes it gets a bit video gamey because inevitably this is all very CGI heavy, because, you know, the lead character is a predator and therefore you never see the actor's real face. It's just the computer-generated face with the mandibles hanging off it and stuff like that. But yeah, no, there's plenty of good visceral bits where the predator cuts people up, chops them open, runs a sword straight through them, and then they sort of fall in half, all the hits. And yeah, I think they've also done the trick you do sometimes to get people to somewhat sympathise with a character who you might not have sympathised with before, in that they very much play the, well, yes, the predator hunts people, but that's just, you know, it doing what comes naturally. You know what's worse? Massive corporations that exploit other species just for money. So yeah, there's... in some ways, they've got us to sympathise with the predator by saying, well, luckily there's something worse, human megacorporations.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that they went in that direction, but yeah, I mean, definitely you're on the Predator's side of this. Yeah, against the Predator against capitalism. I don't know if that's what they wanted from this, kind of film from Disney, one of the biggest companies in the world. But there is something to be said, I suppose, for like a society that, you know, although hunts, kind of has some kind of respect and appreciation for the natural world, by honouring it through its ritualistic hunting is preferable to a society that just strips mined everything for money. And obviously, yeah, there was a lot in this of how like this company, well, the company, it's Weyland Yutani from the Alien movies, because this is firmly in the AVP universe. This company is just kind of like sort of destroying the natural environment of this world just to extract things like for money. So yeah, again, I don't know if it's tapping into some contemporary fears about where capitalism's going.
Oh, it definitely is.
Or like big companies and things like that. Yeah, which is, I don't know if that's something that's inadvertently tapping into, or if it's actually like, you know, Dan Trachtenberg is trying to smuggle in a message about environmentalism and animal rights into this.
I think so.
Film about hunting.
You know, by the time you get to the point where the predator is cuddling the big creature he'd come there to kill and fighting back against the evil corporation, spoilers, sorry, then, you know, I feel that we've definitely got into the we're on the side of the natural world against evil corporations, which, to be fair, you know, although it's always nice to see a moral I agree with, it's not the most radical revolutionary tract I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure I could probably have found roughly this moral in films from like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and also a lot of other recent things, you know, including things we discussed in this podcast. I'm sure we've talked about this, something similar before. I mean, there is almost an element of like the noble savage, even though the predator is a technologically advanced civilization, they kind of live more in harmony with nature nature than the analog for Western civilization, which is, obviously Weyland-Yutani. I mean, the other thing in this film is that, like, the predator is not from the world that he's hunting on, and he has to sort of learn about the flora and fauna and biology of this world. And, like, at the end, he uses the nature of the world, like, it's animals and plant life in order to fight back and kill the evil synthetics from the company. So, yeah, it is very much like a nature versus machine at the end, as the predator gives up on his machines to use nature to fight back against the big tech company. Again, it's not really subtle in that regard, but it is reinforcing the point home that, nature better than machine. Living in harmony and understanding nature is better than just ruthlessly exploiting it as much as possible.
Yeah, which again is fairly basic environmentalism, but this is a very straightforward film. It can have a straightforward moral, and what it's basically focusing on is giving you some clean action scenes and enough quiet, relatable moments with the characters sitting and chatting around the campfire so that you care what happens to them during said action scenes. It's really not doing a huge amount more than that, but it's doing it well enough. And, I can appreciate the fact that, we're 3 films into this set of Predator films, and they have not really made any effort to aggressively franchise it or build some sort of ongoing plot. There's a vague hint at something which could be a sequel hook in the end of this film. But they could also never make that, and this film would still work. But I appreciate that they're just doing this sort of series of anthology-feeling stories about stuff that's happening in the Predator-adjacent world. Obviously, Killer of Killers actually was an anthology, which just makes that feeling even more pronounced. And, if you're going to do a franchise around a concept like The Predator, even if not every film is a masterpiece, this is probably the way to do it.
Yeah. It's working. It's working for them. These films are good. And like I say, these are some of the best Predator films in a long time. I'd certainly say this film and the other 2 that we've discussed in this podcast are, like, better than Predator 2, Predators, and The Predator. Certainly. Much inferior entries in the franchise. This is pretty good entertaining as, just as a Saturday night, Friday night blockbuster. There are some interesting things going on here, as well as this stuff we talked about, the environment. I mean, I thought the world was very well designed. A lot of thought had got into the flora and fauna of this planet, like unusual, like bugs and plant life and things like that. Almost reminded me a bit of, was it Scavenger's Ruin? The
Scavenger's
animated
Vein, that.
Scavenger's Reign, that's it, that animated show from a few years ago. It's nowhere near as creative with his depicting like wildlife and nature as that show was, but there is an interesting coming with this interesting ecosystem and this whole world with its own like environment and biology, and like a lot of effort was put into that, into designing it and realizing it, building up to this, obviously this big apex predator that the predator's hunting, which inevitably there's a twist involved in that, which didn't expect things to be as straightforward as the predator just kills the big creature. But I did like the approach they have of coming up with this like interesting world that felt like a believable natural environment.
I got some hints of Scavenger's Vein in that as well, and it was fun. I liked the somewhat subtle world building of them setting up the various flora and fauna and then having them, as you said, come back towards the end in a way that did actually feel like it was drawing the film together in a satisfying way. Good stuff. As Alastair mentioned, some allusions to the Alien series, but again, they're doing their franchise well in that they're not, smothering us in references or making every film a sequel to something else. You can still understand all these as long as you know vaguely what a Predator is. But, the continuity references are just fun little Easter eggs. It's a Weyland-Yutani is ultimately just a shortcut to it's an evil corporation, and now it's even more obvious that they're evil.
They're an evil tech company. They have robots, or synthetics, we want to call them, and, AIs and things like that, yeah. And you don't need to know that obviously the AI is called Mother, which is the same as the AIs in the Alien films that runs the ships and other things like that. The loader from Aliens turns up at one point, but again, it's just there. It's like very much in the Easter egg category. And if you haven't seen a Predator film since Predator 2 or the original Predator, as probably a lot of people have, you could just pick up this film and watch it. If you're not interested in or don't have Disney Plus to watch the others, you can just go straight to here. It works on that basis because what they don't want, even though I said there's more about Predator society and things like that, is that Dan Trachtenberg realised they don't want massive amounts of complex Predator lore. The audience wants cool, fun action.
Yeah, it does feel like they're probably eventually building up to doing something else in the Alien v Predator vein, but I mean, who knows at this point? I'm in no hurry to get there. If they could do it as a one-off standalone thing and have it not be shit, then all the better.
I mean, you could make a sequel to this that has aliens in it, and you wouldn't have to watch this film or watch previous Alien movies or things like that, I suppose, to understand it. As long as they keep following this basic principle of, make the films fun, entertaining, exciting, don't overburden them with lore and continuity. Yeah, I think people are fully aware at this point that the aliens can turn up in the Predator universe and things like that. Yeah, and if they're going to build towards that as a kind of like a bigger blockbuster, a bigger bite at the summer blockbuster market by having two well-known kind of like cinematic villains in the film, then yeah, that's fair enough. So long as they remember the basics, that we're not here for deep dives into the alien or predator society. We're here for something that has like, you know, engaging plot and character and fun action scenes ultimately.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. As I say, I still haven't seen the first Predator film, but I've enjoyed all these ones.
It's unlikely to trouble the top 5 for the end of the year, but it's certainly good, and it's nice to see that they are making good Predator films after a string of bad ones a few years ago.
Okay, and last up today, we're going to catch up with the comic series World Tree by James Tynion IV and Fernando Blanco. This is, of course, the story of a world in which the internet is finally rising up to kill us, courtesy of a website called World Tree that was created a few years ago by a bunch of nerds, and then, well, they thought they'd managed to bash it down, but it's coming back, led by its chief avatar, a terrifying naked grey tattooed woman called Fear. And in this third volume, we finally get into the secret origin of Fear, who it turns out is the sister of one of the main characters, and also jump forwards as well as backwards into a terrifying future where the internet has basically dominated the planet. So, we enjoyed the first 2 volumes of this. We have read this exciting new one. Alastair, what did you think of it?
So this is another good dark sci-fi thriller, which is, I think, what we said about the previous 2 volumes, but yeah, it's continuing very much in that vein. It's got a sort of sad undertone. I think this one definitely had more of a sort of emotional pathos to it, as we're getting more into the characters and their origins and some of the tragedies, so more of a sense of sadness as well as, you know, the darkness, the violence and the horror of it. Yeah, this is definitely mixing the genres, closely related genres of like sci-fi, horror and thriller. But yeah, it's a good story and we're getting more sense of the world developing. Now we're into the 3rd volume. I feel this is the appropriate point to like broaden things out, develop the world further, expand what's going on. And yeah, so it feels more meaty when we've got into this like bigger world of it, as well as keeping the gore and the violence that was so like striking about previous issues and volumes, and also the distinctive, slightly staticky art style as well. So yeah, I'm still really enjoying this. I'm going to keep reading it, and I hope whatever it gets to a conclusion, it's as good as it's been so far.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this. I think it's a nice combination of they're still keeping this sort of relatable, the internet is evil, but in a vaguely sort of recognisable way, rather than just turning it into a monster. There's still some attempts to make it feel like it's the internet we all use every day, but come to life and spreading darkness in this sort of malignant way. And I think having the sort of down-to-earth stuff with the Sammy character in flashback, showing how she gets sort of sucked into this, does give you some of that relatableness, even as they also sort of catapult it forward into like future dystopia territory, which is perhaps a bit less obviously relatable. So yeah, I think that stuff works. Some of the art here is amazing. The bits where Sammy gets sucked into the internet and first exposed to the things that turn her into Fear, which no need to spoil it in detail, I guess. Yeah, there's some gorgeous work here, some massive spreads, which are both very, very unpleasant and kind of breathtaking. Fernando Blanco, nailing it as ever.
Yeah, and I did think it was very powerful, those sort of 2 issues that kind of tell the story of what happens when Sammy gets sucked into this world. And it's, you know, again, we're not going to spoil what happens, but it's well realised when you kind of imagine like the internet's been built up and you kind of have this sense of like what's it like and what's the process involved of being consumed by it like. And when it's realised, I thought it worked quite well in that it's a good mix of horror and sort of the uncanny and the weird and things like that, and with a sci-fi edge to it as well. So again, mixing these genres, all of which are, you know, some of my favourite stuff together. I thought that was very effective. Probably, in fact, some of the best bits of the story so far.
Well, yeah, that's what you often have to do in this sort of story. You start with like relatable technology, but you have to at some point find a way to represent visually, in this case, in a comic, the idea that they're just touching some sort of primordial darkness that is just spreading through this. And yeah, they've reached a point where they've had to actually try and represent that. And yeah, as I say, it's good. It's both very impressive and obviously, as you'd want, slightly upsetting.
Yeah, and I think that's the horror element, which is a bit more like fantastical, because I've been saying this is like a sci-fi story, and it's a story set primarily, apart from this like future bit, like in, you know, 20th century, 21st century contemporary society, there's like a flashback bit that's what's supposed to be like late 90s, early aughts, and then there's like a more contemporary bit with like smartphones and things like that, because obviously it's a story about technology. And then there's this dystopian future bit, but we'll come to that. Anyway, it's a sci-fi thriller thing with like modern technology and something evil on the internet. But when you get into the evil and what this thing is, it becomes much more of a fantasy story and becomes a lot more, there's more, I don't know, yeah, for want of a better word, magic, although I don't know if any of the characters have used that word, or certainly fantastical creatures, and the horror element all seems to come from that. And I think it works really, really well to take it kind of away from just being like another story about like sci-fi story about evil tech, of which there are quite a lot, for better and for worse. And also when they go to the future, it makes the dystopian future feel a bit different and a bit individual, because in some ways it's a familiar sci-fi dystopia in that, the world's been destroyed, everything's like ruined, there's war, like everything's collapsed, from governments to like technology systems to medical systems, and just some people sheltering, trying to like grow food and like hide out and stuff and salvage some form of society. But it's all fairly familiar stuff. But then outside that, there's these fantasy creatures in the underweb that's been created that are mixing horror, sci-fi, fantasy, which is again what makes this kind of feel distinctive and individual, not just like another post-apocalyptic tech's got out of hand story.
Well, yeah, and obviously the interesting line with this sort of thing is you kind of want it to represent something, like the idea of the internet being some sort of outlet for the darkness of human nature, because when you turn it into just a magic thing that's brainwashing people, it arguably loses some of its power. And yet, it's a comic, it's got this, as you say, sort of fantasy edge to it. You kind of want it to feel a bit more magic and heightened, and like there's something they can, fight against, or like there's some kind of dark force at work here, because that's, the interesting thing that's happening. I think I said when we first covered this that, one of the appeals of this is that it's an internet horror comic that definitely actually feels like it's been written by somebody who's actually used the internet in a sort of online native way, in the way that a lot of us who are adults now have for a long time now. And it'll be interesting to see them try and hold on to that as they go in a more fantastic direction.
Yeah, especially the sense of someone who like grew up with the internet and things like that, because there's like the early bits when it's still internet's early bits being the flash write bits. The internet's still very much something that's on computers that are like large physical objects. Even though they're teenagers and they have computers in their bedroom, which is like I don't know when I got my first computer as a family, probably the late 90s. It was very much one computer for the house, and then later on, I think in my late teens, I got a computer for my own bedrooms, which I didn't have to share with everyone. So they're kind of at that point of as computers get smaller and cheaper and like more part of society. And then someone who's grown up with that and like building these sort of quite primitive websites, but ones that you could kind of building websites back in the day when you could really get your hands under the technology, because you had to learn code and protocols and the technology behind it. And then there's also jumps forward to like present day bits, which are like again, it's smartphones, computers are everywhere, they're in your hands. You can spread a computer based evil thing by just walking up to someone and showing them a smartphone. They don't have to like find a physical computer and wander off into like the dark corners of the internet. It's kind of showing how technology has changed, and also like how online radicalization or whatever has gone from, it's hard to find the dark stuff on the internet because, not everyone's on the internet all the time. And it's like, because of the technology, it can't be in every aspect of your life because the technology is just not there yet, to the point when everyone's got the internet in their pockets all the time. They're on it kind of all the time, or it's gathering information all the time, and it's making decisions for them, including like the content they see, thus meaning it's much easier to fall into like something dark. So clearly, having grown up with that experience, as I have and you have, and probably most of the people listening have, and the writer, it's kind of dramatizing that process, or that difference. And again, it shows that like awareness and understanding of technology.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could argue, if you're trying to tell this story, why introduce a fantasy element? But then you have to remember that stories which try and show the effect of the internet just through showing long shots of people typing, especially in visual mediums like comics and screen, are boring. So I think that's why you end up in this situation where James Tynion is having to, come up with these horror devices and these amazing abstract visuals to try and convey the horror of it.
Lots of people have tried to write novels or short stories that are like, forum posts and text-based and things like that. And usually they're just like, unreadable, or no one wants to read a printout from a forum. You lose that like real timeness, that what makes forums interesting and connectable.
I mean, I'm sure you could make that work in a sort of internet epistolary novel way. I'm sure at this stage in society someone probably has, but yeah, you're right, it is often shit.
Yeah, exactly. And also, if you're going to make a story about dark things on the internet, as in like people getting radicalized by like terrorists, the alt-right, etc., pro-anorexia websites, whatever, they just become very much about the thing that they're about. And in some ways it becomes more about the message than the medium, because part of the problem of the internet is that there are Nazis on it, but also part of the problem of the internet is the way it's built and the structures, and the technology companies that dominate it so much and dominate our attention basically have an incentive to like promote extremist content because of their business models and their incentives and things like that. And if you want to talk about how we use technology in a more general way, then basically bringing in something like fantastical is more exciting, leads to a better story, but also like allows you to to be creative with what the story you're telling, so you can talk about technology more than in a drier way.
Yeah, which is the problem he has so far solved with World Tree. We'll be interested to see how it continues. I must admit, I didn't have time to reread the whole series from the beginning this time to really maximise my context for this. Hopefully I will before the next one, because I feel like I would probably have benefited from it. But I still picked up what they were putting down, I think.
The plot has become, I don't know, maybe like a bit more episodic. Like the previous volume had a large section focusing on the cop character with an eye patch, and she's not really in this volume very much. And the first volume obviously establishing a lot of the main characters and things like that. This one focused a lot more on the people who, discovered the internet when they were young and things like that, and how fear came about. And then there's the bit in the future, which is bringing together various characters, like the guy Ellison, who's the podcaster. He's back in the future bit, and he's trying to piece together what happened. And I like the plot line of him trying to fix the problem of the undernet taking over the world with a story, which I, as a storyteller myself, quite pretentious way to describe myself, I know, but there you go. As a storyteller, I do like the idea of someone saying like the weapon to save the world will be a story, like the right story with the right power. I kind of like that element to it. Like, they're taking the story in that direction, and that's part of this episodic structure. You've got the bit about the cop in the previous one, with FBI agent. There's the bit about how Sammy became fear in this one, and then there's the bit that's in like the post-apocalyptic future, which has a sort of dramatic end of volume cliffhanger ending. So I guess they'll go into where that leads in like the next A volume and B like kind of episodic chunk of storytelling.
Well, yeah, but even though we're reading this, well, I think you read a few of the issues a bit earlier, but I obviously just waited till the whole third volume was out and read it. So yeah, as with a lot of these sort of comics, there is an attempt to make the individual chapters have, value and feel like there's a whole story, or at least a whole decent chunk of story packed into them. And yeah, I do think this one, if it was maybe more 2 stories spread across the volume rather than 1. If you haven't got a 5'6" issue story, fair enough.
Yeah, and by an extraordinary coincidence, because I read some more after volume 2 and then moved on to something else because I read and do things in a quite chaotic way. By an astonishing coincidence, I basically read the Sammy Fear plotline before and then took a break, and then just now, I re-familiarised myself with the Sammy plotline, but the new material was the post-apocalyptic bit, which just worked out quite well, reading it in those 2 separate chunks. Maybe it made them more distinct by having a gap between the 2.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a few of these sort of long-running, ongoing comic series before, and I think this is often, this point around somewhere in volume 2, maybe volume 3, is normally when they go, right, we've established the characters, it's time to do some flashbacks, it's time to set out a bit more about, where they're coming from and what dark secrets they might have. Yeah, this is very much about the point you often reach in these series. Stop, sit with the characters a bit, do some flashbacks, and then maybe start turning things towards, I don't know, the big Act 2 turning point. Which
can be perilous. It's not the easiest thing to do. Definitely, I've talked, and we've both talked on this podcast before, about the dangers of these like mid-arc or late-arc flashbacks that basically fill in stuff, show you exactly how something happened that you basically already know, and it can be a risk. There's definitely been times when I've seen that done in a TV show, the flashback episode that just shows you what you already have intuited. But actually, I thought this worked well because it added more dimensions to the story and expanded it out rather than just dramatising the events that you knew had happened. So, a bit of a gamble, but yeah, worked here.
Yeah, and I think they've done a good job of keeping both the specific events and Sammy herself as a character quite at arm's length from the reader, so that, having this stuff appear in flashback now did feel like legitimately new material rather than just, as you say, a restatement to something we already knew.
Yeah, so overall it's doing really well, and it's got a lot of drama, maintaining its dark style. Yeah, certainly the art by Fernando Blanco, was it?
Yeah.
Really beautiful art that really is like quite beautiful in a dark way, like vivid, disturbing. And the covers as well, which are slightly different style. They always have this kind of really like twisted, disturbing image on the cover as well. It's definitely like horror-y stuff. It's good, yeah. So like I do really, really appreciate the art and how beautiful and gothically valid it all is.
Yeah, no, the dark atmospheric stuff, yeah. It's sort of, as we've said, floating between a lot of genres, between sort of cyberpunk tech thriller and the more fantasy stuff. And in this volume, it maybe gets a bit towards sci-fi as well with the dystopia, and Fernando Blanco is holding it all together beautifully.
There's a different colour palette for the grim dystopian future. There's sort of browny grey colour, which I thought worked quite well as well. Yeah. So overall, this is good, and yeah, we're going to keep going. I don't know when it's finishing, but there's going to be at least one more volume, I gather, so let's see what happens.
Yeah, no, we'll be back, I'm guessing, probably in a year or the best part of a year to see what happens in Volume 4.
That's all we have time for in this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you particularly enjoyed that, you can also follow us on social media to get all the latest updates about what we're covering and when we're doing it. We're on Facebook and Blue Sky, so you can check us out there. You can also follow me. I am nickbryan.com with a dot on Blue Sky and the word dot on Instagram, and also it's a URL that works on the actual internet. It's magical stuff, this, to find out more about my self-published comics.
You can also get more from me on Instagram, Blue Sky and TikTok by searching for Alastair Ball. Find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com and find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. And you can join us here next time when we will be continuing our discussion of Netflix series of films by visionary directors with Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, as well as the second season of Boys spin-off Gen V. Join us in 2 weeks' time to see what we made of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye. We're on Instagram and Facebook, I want to say. Did I get it right this time?
No.
Oh, for God's sake.
Facebook and Blue Sky.
Fuck's sake.